All right, welcome everybody. My name is Sam Palazzolo. Welcome to the Executive Espresso Break. These are short, sharp, highly caffeinated conversations with real leaders who drive real results and shape how we can think differently about growth. Today's guest is Pete Crosby. He's someone that I've known and who's been in the trenches building high performance revenue teams from early stage through scale and beyond. We'll give him the opportunity to introduce himself here in a minute. So grab your espresso and let's get into it. Here's where we're heading today. I think you'll get a lot out of today's conversation that we've titled, Why Revenue Needs a Rethink, Building Growth Engines That Actually Scale. We're going to start off by talking about topic number one, which is the revenue illusion. What's broken in the way most orgs approach revenue? We'll then slide into topic number two, which is diagnosing the growth stall, knowing whether it's a sales strategy or a leadership issue. We'll then transition into topic number three, which is alignment that moves the needle, getting go-to-market teams actually rowing in the same direction. And then we'll bring our conversation today home. Topic number four, the next evolution of revenue leadership. It's kind of the what's coming. And how is it that you can be ready? Okay. Each question has a quick follow-up to go one layer deeper. We'll keep it fast. We'll keep it actionable. So let's get into an introduction here. Again, Pete, I know your background, but share it with everybody else. Give yourself a brief introduction.
Thank you, Sam. And first of all, pleasure to be here. I have, it may not be an espresso, but I do have a pint of what is apparently caffeinated electrolytes. So I'm joining the party. My background is a 4 times revenue leader. So back in the day, I did a startup that we sold a few years later after the dot-com era burned itself out. I then went to when social media was taking off. I joined a social network and we spent 7 years building that. I ran revenue from Series A to IPO. We IPO'd in 2014. And I then, because I'm still a kid really, jumped back in and did some startups doing the bit I really enjoyed, which was Series A to Series B. I did 2.5 mil to 10 mil in about 18 months, then jumped into another startup and did 2.5 mil to 10 mil in just under 2 years. But for the last 5 years, I have been coaching. So I coach currently more than 40 CEOs and founders all over the world, all in the SaaS B2B space, all between 5 and 50 mil. And my company, Revelisco, we do big strategy projects with SaaS businesses to do exactly what we're going to talk about today, figure out how to help revenue to grow in exactly the right way. And it's what I've pretty much committed my life to. I completely love it. We just published this book on revenue leadership. So we've done tons and tons of stuff around there. So I'm really excited to get into the meat of this.
Great. Yeah, we're going to get into it. Again, for those of you joining us who might not know who I am, I'm Sam Palazzolo. I'm ex-Deloitte. I'm a scaling strategist, also a coach, and I'm the founder of Tip of the Sphere Ventures, which is a family office I founded 13 years ago after I led a couple of successful tech initiatives to exit. I've parlayed that experience over the last decade, helping leaders like those of you joining us today scale their organizations from 1 to 10 million and 10 million to $1 billion and beyond. And if that excites you or gets you interested, here's an opportunity, and I'll share it again at the tail end and we'll put it into the notes. But if this session sparks something in you and you want to know more about how it is that you can grow your organization, I offer 20-minute executive espresso strategy sessions. These are not a sales call. They're meant to be one of those things where we'll connect in a one-on-one virtual meeting room to help you identify your number one bottleneck and walk you through how our 5-pillar methodology that we have helped organizations scale, how that works. Okay. Again, the link will be in the show notes and I'll talk about this one more time, but let's get into our topic today. And let's talk about this first topic, which is the revenue illusion, Pete. This topic here, I believe there's a revenue illusion going on out there. So my first question, what's broken about the way most companies think about revenue?
Well, where to start? I think the biggest challenge is that people think that revenue is a thing that you work on, when I believe that revenue is an output. Revenue is what you get from working on other stuff. So that's why when the typical founder or CEO that comes to us will say something like, we've got an issue in our sales funnel, or we've got an issue in the pipeline, or we're not quite closing properly, or we're failing to turn customers into expansion opportunities, like that kind of stuff. So for me, all of that is pretty flipping tactical, and you can, of course, solve those problems. But my question is always, what's the root cause? And what we tend to discover is these things are symptoms of something that's much, much deeper. So, for example, you will find that perhaps they haven't identified their ICP as tightly as they ought to have done, or they haven't thought through where they are in product market fit, or their go-to-market plan hasn't successfully transitioned from strategy to plan to mobilization, or there's something in how they're thinking about the mission criticality of their product. All sorts of different things. It's different every time, which is why it's so much fun. But usually the idea of how do we work on revenue is flawed because they're simply failing to understand that revenue is an outcome.
Yeah, I remember when we first met, you shared with me that while most folks might come to us with a revenue challenge, if you peel back the layers of the onion beyond the revenue as the outer layer, you quickly identify by what sub layers are within that onion within the organization that there's some other things going on that drive the we're not achieving revenue goals. So a quick follow-up question. When you walk into a team that's struggling, where do you see the first cracks? Is it strategy? Is it structure? Is it leadership behavior? Maybe something else.
Well, yes, is the answer to that. Many of all of those things and other stuff. The way that I have identified to work through this is to ask a series of questions. What I'm really looking for is alignment or lack of alignment amongst the leadership team. There's this idea, isn't there? I even got ChatGPT the other day to draw a picture of this for me. If you and I were to start walking in San Francisco, aiming for New York, but we both set off with a 1 degree of separation, we end up about 90 miles apart by the time we get to the other side. In the same way, if I interview the CEO, the CFO, CMO, perhaps, a couple of people, a skip level down, so some VPs, and ask them versions of the same questions, I've never ever done that and got identical answers. And yet they should be identical answers. If you and I were going to set up a sports team or go to war, like, we would expect the plays to be understood. We'd expect the strategy to be clear, and all the generals should know what's going to happen. So why is it that in a business, which is every bit as cutthroat as sports or war, we get to the point where you describe it one way, I describe it another way, then I go and tell my sales team and they describe it another way? Like, good luck to your customers understanding what's going on. So to your question, where do you see the first cracks? It tends to be in how people explain what they think the business is, the problems they think it solves. And if you ask them about the challenges, again, like, they're not going to come up with completely separate ideas usually, although it has happened. But usually there's just enough divergence that if you keep walking in this direction, you're going to end up 90 odd miles apart, and that's never going to fly.
Yeah, it's interesting, listening to you. I'm thinking of a client that we have. We're approaching that budget season, right? And how is it that you can roll out the budget with goals associated with it? The communication plan is crucial. Having everybody sing off of the same song sheet page, regardless of where it is that they fit in within the organization structure, from the senior leadership down to the entry level or customer facing team members, it's all crucial. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Let's move into the second topic, which is what I call diagnosing the growth stall. When growth stalls, you and I both know we need to figure out if it's a sales issue, a strategy problem, or a leadership gap. So from your perspective, what is it? Where should we focus?
Well, it's fascinating to see how you break things down, because I use different terminology, but I break them down in a similar way. It's either going to be in what I would call the design phase,
Hmm.
or it's going to be in the alignment phase, or it's going to be in the execution phase. And that's very similar to the language that you're using there on the slide. Almost always we discover that there are design flaws, like something in the architecture hasn't been thought through properly. This is not 100 times out of 100, but it probably is 90 times out of 100. There is something wrong with the strategy, and it is being recognized through symptoms. So it's a little bit like if you get a sore shoulder, you might go to see a masseur or you might go to see a physiotherapist, and it probably will feel a bit better once someone's prodded around with it for a while.
Mhm.
What's actually happening is you've broken something or you've torn something, then you're going to need a completely different course of action to just someone giving you a massage. So what tends to happen is that people look at those symptoms and try to fix them. That misses all of the strategic elements completely. So that's why I would go through that triage process that I was talking about to try to understand what's really going on in the heart of the business. So let me give you an example. You are running a business where you are having no problem at all to deliver demos. But then once you want to move forward further into the pipeline, perhaps you send a proposal or something, then everything falls apart. You get ghosted, things go quiet, so everything falls off a cliff, close rate is low. So as a
Mhm.
CEO, often your conclusion is, oh, gosh, well, we need to change our sales leader. We need to train our salespeople better. We need to send out better quality proposals, and probably the needle will flicker if you do those things, because you're probably not completely wrong. The reason CEOs focus there is not because they're not strategic, because they tend to be strategic, but because they're entrepreneurs, they're action oriented. And that means they would much rather do something that feels like action than something that feels like sitting, stroking their chins and thinking. And I get it, because strategy that doesn't become action is a complete waste of time. If you do action without strategy, then you're just like flapping around in the darkness like a headless chicken. So it really doesn't work. So first place to think about is strategy. But before you get to execution, and this is why I like your question so much, before you get to execution, which in theory CEOs and founders are pretty damn good at for the reasons I just explained, there's like this rock under the water that your boat can founder on if you're not careful. And that is team alignment. I've rarely met a first time founder that wants to spend money on making sure their team is well aligned,
Mhm.
because it's a waste of money. So this is things like values, it's things like culture, it's things like how to shape the right behaviors on a team, it's things like what are our rules of engagement as a senior group. People do not want to spend money on that very often if they're a first time founder.
Mhm.
He called the other day who wanted us to work on some alignment stuff with him. And I said to him, why? Because most founders don't want to do that. And he said, he said, good question. He said, my first startup didn't think about it at all. And we ended up 5 years in with a company that was reasonably successful, but we didn't really want to work in it. So when I did my second startup, I was really conscious of this, but wasn't very well structured. So we thought about it quite well. This is my third startup. And this time I want to think consciously about how I align my team from the very beginning. So we create the kind of company we want to work in. And I believe that if the company's aligned, we'll go faster, we'll get to the goals more quickly, which is exactly what I think as well. So when you get your strategy right, before you get to execution, there has to be team alignment. Otherwise, strategy falls at the first hurdle, execution becomes fragmented, and you end up not getting very far.
Yeah.
So that's how I would think about this growth issue. There are these three different pillars: design, alignment, and execution. They each need attention, but where founders tend to place their attention is execution, because it's the most fun, or at least it seems to have the most action. And that's nearly always a mistake.
Yeah, no, I see it out there as well. I see I see leaders that have gotten where they've gotten on just pure raw talent, where the action is everything. But what they lack is that strategic skill, right? To kind of pull up, take in the entire landscape of not only their organization, but really what's going on around them, right? Within the industry and the economy. In other words, they confuse action for actual tactical progress, right? Are we moving in the direction that we should? Will my behaviors drive outcomes that are desired? And you know, I'm an accountant by training, so we always look at metrics and KPIs. So the follow-up question I've got for you is, if this is the case, what are the early indicators that you would look at that tell you what to fix first?
Yeah. I would, first of all, before we get to indicators, and I agree with you, I'm a big fan of focusing on unit economics, leading indicators, making sure that the numbers reflect what we think. But the first place to start is, how well have the fundamentals been designed? So, for example, if you want to make an organization act, then you have to give them an urgent reason to act, especially in this business climate, which honestly, for getting on for like 15 years now, it's been very, very challenging to manage in. We are managing through something that our great grandfathers and grandmothers managed 100 years ago, a challenging economic environment. People don't spend money unless there's a good reason to spend money. If you're going to get them to spend money, you've got to show them that the thing that you have built solves a fundamental pain. So how painful is that? And so what I ask organizations to do is say, well, how much pain is currently caused by the problem? Here's a scale from 1 to 10. And so I've graded pain, created a scale, which is based, by the way, for those that are interested, it's based on the McGill pain scale, which came out of McGill University in Canada, which grades physical pain.
Hmm.
And it looks at things like unplanned childbirth. If we interview thousands and thousands of mothers and ask them how painful it is during the course of their of the birth, how painful is this? We can correlate that to a score. And whilst everyone is different on average, from memory, I think childbirth comes out at 32 out of 50. So for all the men listening, turns out that that is more painful than a headache. Your wife was right. But some things are even more painful. My wife has something called trigeminal neuralgia. It scores 44 out of 50, I think. That's a ridiculously high pain.
Mhm.
So from a business point of view, what's a 10 out of 10 pain? What's a 9 out of 10 pain? What's the definition? And once you've identified that, so most organizations kind of know when things are painful, like we can feel the pain. But the next step is, what's the risk and how do you quantify that risk?
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. If you get off this call in half an hour's time and you go to walk out of the door and you miss and you stub your toe on the door frame, I'm sure you're a very polite young man, but you will probably jump around and curse a bit, or at least bite your tongue, like you'll go red in the face. You will not really want to talk to anyone at that moment. It hurts intensely for about 5 minutes. And then you will think to yourself, it might be broken. Should I go to the hospital? I'll probably wait for hours and they won't do anything at all. And I'll come home again and I'll probably just take an Advil and that'll be fine. So I won't do anything.
Yeah.
Heaven forbid, though, that you were to stand up, and I hope this doesn't happen to you or anyone listening to this call, but you feel a sharp pain in your chest. Now, that apparently is usually less painful than stubbing your toe. But we all know that a sharp pain in the chest might be our heart, and that's terrifying because maybe it's a heart attack. What if I die? And so there's a difference between how painful something is and how risky it is to fail to address the pain. In other words, we need to be able to identify what's the pain that the organization we work with feels, what is the risk of them failing to act, and then why the hell is it happening in the first place? We go back to the idea of the heart. I mean, why is that happening? Maybe it's happening because we drink too much, we smoke too much, perhaps we've stopped going to the gym, we don't get our 10,000 steps in, perhaps we're experiencing a lot of stress at work. So now we're getting closer to a root cause. And if you as an organization can say, I see how painful this is. Have you identified quite how risky it is to fail to address this? And by the way, it's probably this root cause, and we can fix that root cause for you, and we can permanently help you to deal with that. And that means you're not going to lose your job or your business, or you won't get critical events wrong, or whatever that may be. That's where I would be going first. So quite happy to come back to your question about unit economics and leading indicators. In fact, maybe I'll do that right now. What we tend to see with our clients is that the principal leading indicator of success is seen in what I call sales velocity. And sales velocity takes 4 different measures and combines them. So it looks at, is your sales cycle reducing? that sounds good. If it's going down, it's gone down from 120 days to 90 days, then we're going. Is the value of your deals going higher? So we worked with a client a while back who was selling to procurement specialists. We helped to reposition it so that they were selling to CFOs. CFOs saw way more value and were prepared to spend a lot more money, stick a zero on the end in order to buy it. So is the deal value going up? Number three, are you seeing a greater quantity of opportunities hitting your pipeline? And number four, what's happening to your close rate? If it's your close rate going up because the people in your pipeline are not just entering the pipeline, but they're closing. Those four things combined, you can Google the formula for that. It's very simple. But if those four things are going up, that means that your capacity to close more business more quickly and therefore meet your number is growing. It's a useful measure because it runs in most cases at least 3 months above the lagging indicator, which is revenue. And rather than fix revenue, what you fix is the precursors of that, the root causes, which allows you to get to the outcome. So that's one method that I would look at. I'm not sure if that answers your question.
It does. It resonates because those four, you call them sales philosophies, those four different metrics are indicative of a
Velocity. Sorry to interrupt. Sales velocity.
Yes. Yes. It's yes. Okay. Yeah. It's indicative of top line revenue and what is broken there. So yeah, certainly looking at sales cycle times, the value that you're bringing, the opportunities that are in front of you, and your close ratios. Those are all really great tangible things to take a look at. It reminded me of, you were talking about the pain management or pain diagnosis. Where is it coming from? In an organization, sometimes we get into them and it's almost like the client has a leaking roof. And you and I both know that the drip could be coming through the ceiling right here, but where it actually, the hole is in the roof could be somewhere dramatically different. So that diagnosis of, one of the things that we took away from our time at Deloitte, at my firm in our coaching and consulting, is a 5-pillar methodology. 5 pillars, 5 different areas of the organization to assess 95 pylons underneath those 5 pillars. What we're attempting to do is drive down to bedrock regarding what with specificity should we focus on, and specifically, what's the order? What should we really be going out after, and what's the order? So no, spot on from that perspective. Let's keep going. Let's get into this next topic here. We've talked about it a little bit when you were speaking of team alignment, but I'm wondering, the topic is alignment that moves the needle. And if alignment is one of those words that everybody loves to use, few can execute, but most teams, I guess from my perspective, they just don't have this alignment. So the question that I've got here, what have you found that actually works to get the different areas within an organization, marketing, sales, product, and success, working towards the same type of a growth engine?
The first thing is to forget about department titles like sales, product, marketing. This is a useful modern construct that helps us understand where people's skills and attributes lie. But obviously, it makes sense to describe oneself as a marketer or a salesperson. But from a revenue point of view, it's a red herring. It takes us in the wrong direction. Because what tends to happen is, now let's imagine I'm the VP of marketing. I'm responsible for content, so I want to think about that. I'm responsible for events, so I want to think about that. I might be measured on MQLs or even SQLs. Therefore, my behaviors and actions are driven by all of the things that I just mentioned. And we could talk about the same thing with the customer team, the product team, the sales team, etc. In my view, there's only 4 things that an organization has to do to get things right and to win. It's easy to say, hard to deliver. And those 4 things are, the first is build something desirable, build something that people really need, that they want, and think constantly about its desirability. And that goes from strategic fundamentals right to, when I land on your app, do I want to use it? It goes all the way through the business. Second thing, desirability, is clarity. How many startups have you seen, myself, many, who do have a desirable product, but nobody understands or nobody knows or the message isn't out there. So are you telling the story in a way that is so clear that it just lands with? So you've got desirability and clarity. Third thing then is predictability. Are you building it in a scalable way? How many, even at sort of 10, 15 mil sometimes of ARR, how many times do you find that the CEO still needs to be in the big meetings or the big pitches, or is the only one that can really deliver the story properly? Have we found a way to scale this up? Do we know that when we sign a customer, 8 or 9 months later, they will expand, then at 12 months, they will renew, our net dollar retention will be high? Like, do we know how to do that systematically?
Yeah.
And once we've got that right, that's the fourth and final thing, which is deliverability. In other words, can we deliver everything that we promised, or even better, exceed what we promised? That starts to make these things into a flywheel, because that great deliverability leads to further desirability, it leads to advocacy, makes things spin more quickly. So why am I saying that in answer to your question? If your senior team, as a starting point, are aligned around those four things, and are all rewarded on the measure of whether those four things exist, which is revenue growth, then you're in a really good position. Well, most organizations that I encounter, the only person that is really properly incentivized on revenue is the sales leader, often called the revenue leader, but what they're actually doing is handling sales. All of us should be thinking about desirability. The product leader should be thinking about predictability, about clarity. The customer leader should be thinking about all of these things. If we're doing that, then what happens is we start to gravitate as a leadership team toward being a member of the leadership team rather than being a representative of our department. And so in bad teams, what happens, and I use the word team very loosely here, is the sales leader's job is to report to the senior team, to their colleagues, on everything that's happening in the sales team, perhaps raise some problems as well and try to work with others, but we all have conflicting priorities. We're not properly focused.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, our job is to be on the leadership team and then go back to our sales department and deliver on the objectives that have been agreed centrally. That is very simple to say, and it's pretty logical, and it's pretty flipping obvious, but I've got to tell you, you hardly ever see it, except in extraordinary high growth businesses that have figured out how to do this. So alignment starts, there's lots of other things to be said here, but alignment starts with the central team focusing on what really matters.
Yeah, it's a great lens to look at the business. You know, in a business life cycle, as people or in organizations go from early stage to an acceleration or a growth mode to a maturity phase, and then maybe ultimately a declination. That that early stage is when you see leaders wearing multiple hats. It's back to where you started, which is get rid of the department titles. You know, it's almost as an organization grows and mature, we're from a focal point, we only take in our direct responsibility with organizational responsibility. And that's kind of the conflicting priorities. I could see that resulting. I have a follow-up question about those four things. I'm wondering where you see the biggest opportunity for those clients that you work with across that. The first one, again, was desirable, right? Is what you're building desirable. The second one is clarity. Can you tell the story of what your product offering is with clarity so people understand and can take action? The third is the predictability. In other words, are you building it right? And then the fourth one was deliverability. Are you delivering it in the channel that the client wants to receive it in, so that way they can take action with it? But desirable, clarity, predictability, deliverability, those four areas that you discussed, is there one that you see is primary focus or folks just get wrong?
Yeah, it's desirability, because the others flow from that. Let's imagine that we were to start with clarity and tell a story. What are we telling the story about?
Yes.
It's the pain that we solve. What's the risk that we are able to heal? What is the root cause that we're dealing with? If we don't know those things, then we might be able to craft a good story because we might be good at marketing and selling. but ultimately we'll never get the kind of close rates, etc., and longevity of customers that we were talking about.
Yeah.
And the whole point of predictability is that as you look for predictable elements in your process and then go to scale them, of course, it's quite possible to scale completely stupid things that you really don't want to do. And you must have seen that yourself as well. And likewise, by the time you've done that, you're probably going to underwhelm people when it comes to deliverability. The key is desirability. And I would always think about two fundamental factors in desirability. And the first is what I call criticality. And the second is what I call rarity. And if you think of them on a basic chart like this, with criticality going up the left-hand side and rarity going on the bottom, like all good charts, you probably in the top right-hand corner, like very critical, very rare. And so what that means is, to an organization inside our very tightly defined ICP, ideal customer profile, we are absolutely fundamental to them solving this pain point, mitigating the risk, and getting to value. And rarity, nobody else quite does it like we do. Those are the fundamental principles that underpin desirability. One without the other isn't enough. For example, it's mission critical for you and I to put gas into our cars, but there are so many gas stations and they're not that well differentiated usually, other than perhaps on price, and we're not all price sensitive. What's more likely to happen is when the needle is low enough that we need to fill up, go to the first one that we see. Mission criticality isn't enough. Rarity in itself isn't enough, because like, to be rare, to be unique, to be the only one, sometimes there's a good reason for that. It's because no one actually wants it. So finding the sweet spot between those two things is fundamental. So the short answer to your question is, you can't deal with any of this stuff without desirability. And that is the most fundamental strategic principle.
Awesome. Excellent. Excellent. Let's move on to the next topic here. The final one. Let's bring it home. An area that I call the next evolution of revenue leadership. So if we zoom out and we take into account the entire landscape, what's the biggest shift you see coming in how leaders need to approach revenue over the next, I don't know, three years? Let's go at that, because anything further than that, I'm convinced, is pure fantasy. But 3 years out, 3 years, right? What is the biggest shift you see coming?
Yeah, I think, well, there's no question. I don't think anyone is going to be surprised by my answer to this, but ensuring that you wrap AI into each of those four elements that I just spoke about, desirability, clarity, predictability, and deliverability, is obviously going to be critical. And there's far more knowledgeable people on this subject than I that can talk about the ways to accomplish that. Although, of course, I have views like everything. But I think the bit that I can add to the conversation, which is interesting, is when it comes to things like alignment. Like, what does alignment really mean? To me, it means shared principles, like a shared way of engaging with the world. You and I might be both very successful and have completely different sets of behaviors. One is not necessarily better than the other, but you and I working together might not work well. So shared principles. The second is a shared focus. Do we have a very clear sense of objectives and where we're going? The third is a shared sense of leadership. Like, what does it mean to lead a team of human beings through what is effectively the software equivalent of trying to climb Kilimanjaro? You know, it's a flipping hard thing to do. How are we going to do this without falling off the mountain? And then fourth, as we grow, we're going to need organizational maturity. That's because the thing that helps us to succeed at 1 mil of ARR isn't quite good enough at 10 mil, not quite good enough at 15, 20, 50. As we grow, how are we going to grow with it? Those four things are critical. They are going to be, if we think of AI like a storm, our boat is going to be rocking up and down. And it's the organizations that find the way to harness that wind rather than the ones that get blown back from it and tipped over. And that will entirely come down to this alignment section in the middle. We all know the ways that we can deploy AI and the software that's out there to help us to do that. We're not stupid. I think some people will miss the boat, but I think we're going to do okay there. But how do I get my team to gather around that? How do I keep the boat pointing in the right direction? And how do I ensure that Sam's boat isn't 5 or 10 miles ahead of mine within minutes, because he's found the right way to harness that wind. And that comes down to team alignment. So I think perversely, the thing that is going to drive the successful adoption of AI is going to be the way that you think about the humans in your organization.
It's interesting. The follow-up question I had is, for someone running a company today, what's the one thing that they can do coming out of our conversation, listening to us here, that they can begin implementing and executing straight away to stay ahead of the shift that you described for alignment?
If I take the biggest lesson that I've ever learned and apply it to what I've just said, the answer is to adopt and create and adapt frameworks over and over again. If I come back to that analogy I gave of trying to navigate a choppy ocean in a storm,
Mm-hmm.
how does a successful captain do that? Because the storm is always different. The wind blows in different ways, the place in the ocean that we're in, perhaps the ship that we're navigating, where the rocks are, it's all different. But how does a successful captain learn to read that?
Yeah.
What he is able to do is figure out how does a successful captain pilot a boat? There will be 10 steps. There will be 10 things to look out for, 15, 20, whatever it is. There's a framework. So when you're thinking about how to navigate your way through your role over the next few years, what frameworks can you rely upon? I'll give you an example. I think about the buyer journey as having 5 steps: A, B, C, D, E, really easy to remember. Awakening. Gosh, I had no idea that electric cars existed. B is browsing. I wonder which electric cars are suitable for me. C is choosing. Right, I've got it down to 2 or 3. I'm going to buy one of these. D is deploying. Here I go on my first drive. I hope it's as good as I thought it was going to be.
Mm-hmm.
E is experiencing. I love this car. I'm going to keep it. I'm going to buy another one. I'm going to upgrade. I'm going to tell all my friends about it. So these 5 steps. So in your buyer journey, now you know you've got 5 steps. Now you can ask yourself, well, what's the question that my buyer is asking in each of these 5 steps? Now you can ask yourself, well, how do I answer each of those 5 steps? What's my angle?
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just a simple framework that, even though AI has come along and changed everything, the buyer journey remains the same. I become aware of something. I look at things. I choose something. I hope that I have a good first experience, and then off I go and become a customer. That's not changing. So applying frameworks to everything. And if you don't have your own, look for others. Of course, I spend my life building frameworks, but I'm not the only person. Other people have built fascinating frameworks. Perhaps the one that really got me interested in things was Geoffrey Moore, talking about crossing the chasm, like very, very famous. But think about Geoffrey Moore as a framework. Think I've actually got his book, his most recent book here, The Infinite Staircase. What's cool about this is not even a business book. It's simply a book where he applies his framework thinking to a philosophy of life itself. Fascinating stuff. So my answer is adopt, build, and adapt frameworks so that you can best navigate your situation.
Yeah, yes. Very similarly, I look at AI as you need to be the adopter or the adoption king. And by that, I mean, make your organization an AI first organization. In other words, how is it that you are going to lead with AI, regardless of whatever the topic of the meeting is? I had somebody ask me, my 8th book is titled Leading at the Tip of the Spear. I wrote it in the pre-AI days, right? When you really had to write. And somebody asked me the other day, how would you rewrite that book leveraging AI? And I told them, I said, I would go through chapter by chapter, have AI, have the Gen AI platform of my choice, diagnose what it is that I'm sharing, but more importantly, bring into scope or focus, what's the real world application that I can do based off of what it is that Sam's talking about here? And so this very nicely fits in with your adopt, create, and adapt, that framework, that methodology that you were just discussing. So
Yeah.
awesome. Let's bring it home. How can people get a hold of Pete?
You can write to me on LinkedIn. I try to reply to everyone who isn't a spam. And if you go to revelesco.com, you can just click on a button and get in touch with us. And I will reply directly. If you want to email me, you can email enquire with an E, enquire@revelisco.com.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put those in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me here today, Pete. A wealth of knowledge shared on our topic today. If you're looking to break through your next goal, I know that we can help. Take advantage of this Executive Espresso strategy session. Connect with me. We'll put in the show notes how easy it is to connect for a 20-minute complimentary session. Again, I'm Sam Palazzolo, Real Strategies, Real Results. Thanks for joining Pete and I today for this version of the Executive Espresso Break. Bye now.
Absolute pleasure. Bye now.